And we're back with the program. This is Gerald Glassford from the Pop Culture Cosmos Show and Game Source. We truly appreciate you being part of the broadcast here today as far as for the PCC Multiverse. And I'll tell you what, it's another great week in the NFL coming up. And who better to break it down with me than the man, the myth, the legend. He's just truly the voice of fantasy football. If you have any issues or concerns or anything you want advice on in and around fantasy football, there is no better place to go to than the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt podcast group on Facebook. There's also ffpaydirt.com. And of course, you can listen twice a week on Tuesdays and Saturdays to the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt podcast, which is now available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Overcast.fm, Player.fm, and SoundCloud. It's my good friend, Mr. Tyler Baker. What's going on, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you for the high praise. I appreciate that.
Well, it's a can't miss podcast. And I was listening to it the other day when your Tuesday show dropped, and you had those 6 guys that, you might want to consider picking up as far as that might be on the waiver wire because of all the injuries that have happened to pretty much across the board in fantasy football. Yeah. But there's a lot of great games on tap, so I want to get your thoughts on what's going on with this weekend in the NFL as far as if you're a fantasy football owner and where you should turn to first for all your moves.
Well, this is an interesting point in the NFL season. A lot of teams are just banged up. So a lot of teams are forcing to adapt and are forcing to change. And as far as fantasy football, this is the point where you have a lot of teams on bye this week, next week, 6 teams in each one of those 2 weeks. That's a lot of roster adjustments that you're going to have to make. It's a torrent for some people. Like, there's just a lot going on, and the Facebook group is a really good place to go to get. And it's so hard to do a podcast or write an article about about what to do with someone's team, because I don't know your scoring system. I don't know your league. I don't know who's on your waiver wire. So the Facebook group, I really enjoy when people join that and ask their questions via the Facebook group, because I can see what the rosters are. I can see who's on their waiver wire. But this is very much an interesting week. Again, there's 6 teams on bye. And since the Tuesday podcast, Dontrell Inman, who was a wide receiver that was buried on the Chargers depth chart, he has now been traded to the Bears, and the Bears have really been hurting for a receiver. And Inman, when he was called on to play in Los Angeles and when they were in San Diego, he's done really well. So he's a good, skilled receiver that is now on a team that is really hurting for a receiver. So I don't think he's going to do much this week, but maybe in the next couple of weeks, he might be a guy that I guarantee you is on your waiver wire. Again, probably not much this week, but it will be an interesting game to watch because they are playing New Orleans. And Chicago playing New Orleans, I think that Chicago is going to have to attempt more than 7 passes. Against last week, they attempted 7 passes and managed to win the game. They're not going to be able to do that against New Orleans. So that's one of the games that I'm really going to be looking at. How is the rookie quarterback, Mitch Trubisky, how is he going to respond in a game where he's going to have to put up a lot of points?
You stole my thunder, man. You stole my thunder. As soon as you started talking about a receiver for Chicago, 7 passes that we had talked about in our previous episode, that I was going to come right back on you. I'm like, why does Chicago need a receiver? It doesn't seem like they throw the ball much there in the Windy City. But let's see. Let's assume things will change and things will go back to what should be 2017 norm. And Mitchell Trubisky, just call him Mitch. Mitch Trubisky. Yeah, it sounds much better.
It does.
Throwing the ball upfield. So I definitely think that might be a good play as well. Any others stick out to you as far as being something, maybe a waiver wire pickup, but also as well something, a matchup that you're looking forward to this weekend in the NFL?
Well, a couple of these of these teams have changed significantly, and due to injury. In Washington, you have their Pro Bowl guard is out, and their left tackle, Trent Williams, he is questionable. And in that same game from Monday night, the Philadelphia Eagles lost their long-time left tackle. That's going to be a big blow to that team. And based on what they did last year, when he wasn't playing, it was an issue. So we're going to have to see how these two teams are going to be able to bounce back from those injuries. And Cleveland, not that it matters much, but their longtime left tackle is out as well. And
Joe Thomas, he played over 10,000 straight snaps.
I know. The best player on that team, by far the best player on that team. And he's always been the best player on that team. He's out, might not come back. So that's going to be a pretty big deal. Cleveland is going to have Deshaun Kaiser starting this week. Don't know if he'll finish the game. Remains to be seen.
Not what I do, but don't want to go into it again this week. That's beating a dead horse.
Yeah. Now, if you are looking for a running back, keep in mind that Marshawn Lynch is not going to play. And that is going to open up the door for Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington. They also activated Elijah Hood, who's kind of a big bruising running back. So those might be some sneaky pickups. If you're in a PPR league, I would definitely go with Richard, if not Washington. If you really are in a deep league and are really desperate, Elijah Hood could come in and score a touchdown. But that's only if you're very desperate in a very deep league.
Well, that's some great insight indeed. Once again, this is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt Podcast. His episodes drop every Tuesday and Saturday on Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, SoundCloud, Overcast, Player.fm, and just a great podcast indeed. Tyler, I also want to make sure that there's some great matchups still in the NFL that'll be coming along this weekend. Mm-hmm. Who are some big plays as far as some expected, let's say, flex, wide receiver, running backs that really stick out to you? Or do you want to go somewhere? Let's go in deeper. Let's talk about tight ends, because tight ends are a position that don't get a lot of love as far as from a lot of individuals at fantasy football out there, but they can be the difference between winning and losing.
They can. I really like Marvin Jones Jr., wide receiver for Detroit this week. Golden Tate may play. He's limited in practice. It's going to be a truly game time decision. But Marvin Jones, I think, is somebody that is very much worth a play. He might even be on your waiver wire, but he could be the number one receiver this week. They are playing Pittsburgh, so they're going to have to put up some points if they want to stay in that game. As far as tight ends, again, getting back to that Chicago-New Orleans game, Zach Miller has been the number one receiver for that team, and he's a tight end, and they are going to have to put up points, or they're going to have to at least try to move the offense. So in my mind, you're talking Tariq Cohen, and you're talking Zach Miller. If Dontrell Inman can get in there, cool. But he's been with the team for a week. He's probably hasn't even unpacked his apartment yet, or house or whatever. As far as other tight ends, I like Hunter Henry, tight end for the Los Angeles Chargers, going up against New England. Donta Hightower is not going to be playing. That's going to soften up the middle of that defense. So Hunter Henry may be a good play. Also, Tyler Kroft in Cincinnati has kind of taken over Tyler Eifert's role and has been doing a pretty good job. Cincinnati 2-4, fighting for their lives. They are playing a undermanned Indianapolis team. Now also on Indianapolis, their tight end, Jack Doyle. I've not been impressed with his play, but he's getting so many targets. They are just feeding him the ball. He's dropping passes. He's not looking good. He's not looking as good as he did last year and even in the beginning of this season. So I think it's something that he could pull out of. So if you're looking for a tight end, maybe a couple of those guys. Buffalo is missing their tight end and Charles Clay, and they have I think it's Nick O'Leary is in there, not heavily targeted, but as he gets more acclimated to being in the game, perhaps he could get some more looks. They are playing Oakland this week. Buffalo's surprisingly 4-2, and I'm sure that they want to keep that going. And if they are going to keep that going, Tyrod Taylor is going to have to connect and keep up with that Oakland offense, because that Oakland offense is pretty good. Even without Marshawn Lynch, the Oakland offense is pretty good.
But it's been a little bit erratic, especially because they have not been able to get the expected running game from Marshawn Lynch or whoever's been in that backfield. But if they can get things going, Derek Carr, if he's healthy enough, can get things hopefully to Crabtree, which is my personal favorite because he's on my team. And then also Amari Cooper. Golden Tate, like I said, he's a game time decision. So if you got to stay in tune with what's going on with Fantasy Football Pater Podcast on their group page, which is on Facebook, to get the latest on his status. And then also as well to keep up with everything, ffpater.com and the Fantasy Football Pater Podcast, like I said, on all those great podcasting channels.
Yeah, and it's going to be especially difficult with Golden Tate because he has the Sunday night game, and you're probably not going to know if he's going to play or not until the Sunday day games are already going. So that's really, if we hear something else on Friday's injury report, I will definitely let you know on the Saturday podcast. But that's going to be a really tough call to play Golden Tate because of that late game. That's going to be a tough call.
And one last thing, since we're really delving into positions that normally don't get a lot of love, but can be the difference between winning or losing. How about kickers? Are there some kickers out there that are of interest to people out there, or should be some interest? Because sometimes people just draft a kicker and they'll just leave it on the roster and they'll just leave it in starter each week after week, and they just really just don't give it a second thought. And then they wonder why they only get 2 or 3 points out of a kicker as opposed to somebody who gets 12 or 15. So your thoughts on a kicker that maybe people might need to switch over to if they've been on the waiver wire for a little while now, because sometimes these bad teams have kickers that do really well.
Sure. And there are a couple things that you want to look for in a kicker. You want to look for a kicker that plays in a high-powered offense that puts up a lot of points. That's kind of obvious. And then you might also want to look for a kicker that's going up against a pretty good defense, kind of the bend but don't break defense. And those kickers are really good to stream from week to week. And I haven't really looked at the kickers for this week yet. Kickers are not my specialty. The one fantasy football league that I commission, it's the name of it is Kickers Aren't Real People. No disrespect, but there are no kickers in my fantasy league because they are such a dice roll. And it's not anything that it doesn't take. There are minimal strategy involved in picking a kicker from week to week. A lot of it is just flat out luck, and it comes down to how the game unfolds. There's nobody that could look at Ryan Suckup the other week and say, oh, he's going to kick 5 field goals. You don't know that. So generally, I try to get a kicker on a high-powered offense, and I try to, if I'm streaming, kind of look at the matchups. Washington just got a new kicker. They put their kicker on IR. So now that's a team that is notorious for putting up points, notorious for getting into the red zone and not scoring touchdowns. So his name escapes me right now, but the new kicker for Washington might be one that, if you need an upgraded kicker, might be someone to look at.
Definitely, indeed. And like you said, you're looking for an offense, the high-power offense, or a team that really gets into the red zone but just can't get quite over into the goal line. So you'll see a lot of 9 points from them, 12 points is from them as well. But that can make all the difference. But like you said, it can be. It can be.
And you can also look for kickers that are playing in a dome where they don't have the elements to worry about. That's why a lot of guys like Detroit's kicker, or a lot of guys like New Orleans kicker, high-powered offense, plays half their games in a dome. So there are a couple little things, and again, fantasy football is all about finding the smallest advantage, and those little things, if you're streaming a kicker, can help. But it is kind of a dice roll.
It is kind of, indeed. And one last question to ask you on kickers. Are you still noticing some leagues that actually still play off of length? Because I know I played a long time ago as far as for kickers that had certain amount of points for the length of their field goal, 0 to 30, 30 to 50, and then 50 and beyond.
Yes. I'm in geez, I think I'm in 10 leagues this year, and it does kind of vary. I would say half of them do just 3 points for a field goal, and that's it. But the other half, they do add additional points for those additional yardage, especially something over 50. Which, if a guy kicks a field goal over 50 yards, that's a big deal in a real football game, and it should probably be worth more points in a fantasy game too. And there's not that many kickers that even attempt those. Probably only I don't know, probably 65% of the coaches in the NFL trust their kicker with a 50+ yard field goal. Some of them would just rather punt and get the good field position. So
definitely some great word of mouth there from the man that knows fantasy football. It's Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Pater podcast. Once again, you can check out his latest podcast every Tuesday and Saturday when it drops on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Overcast.fm, Player.fm, SoundCloud. Check out his great site, ffpater.com. And if you really want to shoot the breeze when it comes to fantasy football, head on over to Facebook, where you can just type in the words Fantasy Football Pater Podcast. Look for the Facebook group that's there. It's a fast-growing group with a lot of great words indeed, a lot of great people indeed talking to each other about the latest in fantasy football ideas, trades, moves, waiver wire additions, subtractions, what have you. They're all being discussed in this group, so you want to check it out indeed. Tyler, as always, my friend, I'm looking forward to a great weekend, week 8 in the NFL.
Week 8.
And I wish you all the best in all 10 of your leagues this weekend.
I know. It's ridiculous.
I don't know how you keep track of it all, but if there's anyone that can do it, I know it's you, my friend.
It's not that difficult. I kind of know the guys that I like and the guys that I don't, so I just kind of breeze through. The only difficulty is remembering the scoring differences between the leagues. That sometimes kind of takes me a second to readjust, but I answer so many questions and I look at this stuff so much. To go in and set my lineups really doesn't take me that much time.
Oh, that's awesome indeed. And once again, it's Tyler Baker for the Fantasy Football Pater podcast. You got to catch it today if you have a fantasy football team and need better direction, or you need a different direction.
Yeah, I'm always glad to help. Yeah,
exactly. And he's always been there for me, and I truly appreciate him and his group for so much as far as doing the best that they can for everyone out there when it comes to fantasy football. Tyler, as always, great having you aboard, and I will catch you very soon.
Yeah.
This coming up on the Monday show, where we'll recap week 8 in the NFL.
I'm looking forward to it. I love Pop Culture Cosmos. I love listening to the show. It's kind of weird hearing my own voice on it, but it's a great show. I love what you guys are doing.
Well, you'll be hearing Michael Bay's voice in Dora the Explorer right after your voice in the commercials. So I don't know if that's a great thing indeed, but we'll talk a little bit more about that with Josh, and
Cool.
Hopefully we can avoid the Armageddon and Transformers while we're doing so, but we'll have to wait and see. Thanks again, Tyler.
Dora has a lot to explore.
Indeed she does. Poor girl. She has no idea what she's in for.
Yeah. Oh, thanks a lot, Gerald. I appreciate you, man.
All right. Take care, my friend.